What if the single darkest force at the heart of Warhammer 40K never existed? Imagine a galaxy where demonic whispers don't rot loyalty, where warp corruption never spawns cults, and where the Horus Heresy never fractures humanity's greatest project. That is not a small tweak. It's a chain reaction that rewrites every empire, every war, and every survival strategy. In this video, we will tear apart canon, run the dominoes forward, and reveal an alternate 40K so unfamiliar it will feel like a different franchise. By the end, you'll see how removing chaos doesn't simply make things nicer. It replaces cosmic madness with colder, more efficient horrors. Stay close. The first 5 minutes will flip what you think you know about the Imperium. The next 10 will explode Eldar, Orks, Tyranids, and Necrons in surprising ways. And the finale will ask whether a universe without chaos is safer or far more lethal. First domino, the warp. In canon, the warp is volatile, sentient, and morally corrosive, the engine of corruption. In our alternate timeline, the warp is still real but far more stable. A navigable energy medium without sentience-driven seduction. That immediately transforms interstellar logistics. Navigators face fewer mutations, warp storms are rare, and long-range travel becomes predictable. Fleets operate on timetables, not superstitions. Trade corridors become secure. Colonies receive reliable supply lines, and star systems integrate into political blocks rather than isolated theocracies. The strategic effect is huge. No permanent, universe-shaking anomalies to destabilize supply. No spike in psychic plagues. In short, a practical warp makes expansion less fearful and more methodical. Cutting chaos from human history removes the single biggest internal fracture, the Horus Heresy. Without daemon corruption and warp-born temptation, Primarchs don't fall en masse, and the Great Crusade continues without a catastrophic civil war. The Emperor's project looks different. Less divine mythology, more technocratic consolidation. The imperial institutions still exist, but they are bureaucratic bodies oriented toward expansion and engineering, rather than ritualized oppression against internal metaphysical threats. No heresy means no scorched earth retrenchment, no millennia of isolation and stagnation. The consequence, humanity's technological curve advances because resources aren't devoted to fighting daemonic fallout, and political energies go into colonization, administration, and defense against external, non-warp enemies. Without widespread chaos corruption, fear of psychers collapses. Psychers remain dangerous, but their practices are normalized into regulated science. Instead of burning psychers at the stake, the Imperium develops training, containment, and applied psychic engineering programs. Astra Telepathica evolves into research universities, producing navigators, shipborne sensors, and long-range communications, not just witch hunters. The Mechanicus collaborates more openly, where survival and engineering demand it. Knowledge hoarding less justified when the metaphysical apocalypse threat is gone. On the social level, propaganda shifts. Less emphasis on ritualized fear, more on civic duty and frontier governance. This doesn't mean a liberal utopia. Empire building still breeds exploitation, but the culture is far more pragmatic and technologically forward. Eldar backstory depends on psychic decadence and the birth of Slaanesh. Remove chaos, and the Eldar never erupt into the cataclysm that produced Slaanesh. The cataclysmal end is avoided, and their decline becomes a slower cultural rot rather than an instant apocalypse. Craftworld society, though fragile, adapts differently. Instead of surviving as tiny spiritual arc ships, they remain numerous enough to maintain spheres of influence. This gives Eldar more time to reform politically and culturally. Some factions may even attempt constructive alliances with human polities to preserve art and memory. Dark Eldar still exist, but their predation on souls loses the warp-powered edge. Komarog becomes political intrigue and piracy, not interdimensional soul farming. The Eldar remain ancient players, but their threats are more strategic than metaphysical. Orcs are inherently chaotic in behavior, but their latent psychic field often amplifies warp phenomena in canon. In a stabilized warp, Orc gestalt field effects are more predictable. Wagas still surge, but their reality-bending spikes are muted. Orc technology and improvisation still work because of mass psychology, but fewer spontaneous reality-bending events happen mid-battle. That means entire sectors might see repeated Orc invasions with consistent tactics rather than random reality smashes. Orcs remain brutal, but more biological than mythic. This actually makes them easier to combat strategically, not because they're weaker, but because their unpredictability is reduced. War becomes a matter of logistics, attrition, and engineering against living hordes. Without chaos, the galaxy lacks a metaphysical wild card, and something fills that vacuum: the Tyranids. These biohunger swarms are entirely material threats, no daemons, no warp-born paradoxes, and their efficiency makes them existentially terrifying. A stable warp and a more technologically competent Imperium mean humanity can mount coordinated multilateral defenses, but Tyranids demand unprecedented cooperation. Expect human, Eldar, Tau, and other factions to form large, pragmatic coalitions, but cooperation is temporary and brittle. Tyranid invasions expose infrastructure weaknesses and force brutal triage decisions. With no chaos to distract factions, wars against Tyranids are the primary crucible that either unites or pulverizes alliances. Necrons are already an unemotional, technical menace. In a chaosless galaxy, they're even more dangerous because there's no warp-based counterforce to exploit. Their awakening cycles and cold logic turn entire systems into mechanical necropolises with surgical precision. Without daemonology to bog down enemies, Necron attrition warfare becomes a war of attrition of a different sort. Domain reclamation by an immortal machine race that treats living empires like garden pests. The lack of warp-based confusion empowers Necron tactics. Coordinated quantum phase strikes, targeted dismantling of infrastructure, and near-irresistible reclamation sequences. The endgame for many regions is either careful containment or systematic purging. But purging is expensive. Chaos's removal forces political realignment. The Imperium's paranoia-driven isolationism weakens because the existential internal threat is gone. Trade and treaties become more appealing when the primary corruption vector is absent. New alliances emerge based on shared practical concerns: resource access, defense against Tyranids or Necrons, and technological exchange. Expect commercial blocs, military federations, and defensive pacts to become common. But alliances are brittle, clashing long-term goals, xenophobia, and cultural arrogance keep true unity elusive. Where chaos once guaranteed endless civil war through corruption, now war arises from scarcity, fear, and competition. The politics are colder and nastier in a bureaucratic sense: less cults and rituals, more treaties, mercantilism, and proxy wars. Paradoxically, removing chaos doesn't automatically produce infinite progress. The Imperium's political culture still favors control, and institutions like the Mechanicus may still hoard secrets for power. Yet overall investment in science and infrastructure rises because resources aren't consumed by demonic cleanups. We'd likely see faster starship evolution, refined weaponry, and better planetary engineering. But innovation will cluster around survival pressures, anti-Tyranid biology, Necron counter-electronics, and large-scale logistics. A tech race emerges, not between ideology and faith, but between factions desperate to survive real, material threats. The result? Selective, highly practical technological leaps, rather than broad cultural enlightenment. Remove metaphysical temptation, and you don't remove human brutality. Imperial governors still violate rights, Corporations still exploit colonies, and ethics remain negotiable in the name of survival. The difference is the axis of corruption shifts. Instead of soul-selling bargains and demonic pacts, empire builders trade in political betrayals, corporate monopolies, and scientific atrocities. The horror becomes systemic: eugenics programs, planetary sterilization to deny resources to Tyranids, and cold bureaucratic purges. In short, the absence of chaos swaps one form of horror for another. Less Gothic mysticism, more clinical, effective oppression. That reality is arguably worse for civic life, because it's harder to rally moral outrage against paperwork and taxes than against monsters. A chaosless 40K gives different narrative highs. Instead of demonic battles and psychic breakdowns, stories will lean on grand strategy, siegecraft, and tactical ingenuity. Imagine multi-sector fleets coordinating to carve out safe corridors against Tyranid swarms, or fragile coalition politics collapsing under Necron shock tactics. Personal dramas remain. Commanders faced with impossible choices, scientists who push ethics to survive, and surviving cultures trying to preserve art against mechanized reclamation. For creators, this universe offers a grim, hard sci-fi tone, less cosmic horror, more military realism and political tragedy. For audiences, the stakes feel grounded and unnervingly plausible. So which is worse, a galaxy with chaos or one without it? The answer is complex. Chaos injects madness and hurt, but it also forces factions to confront supernatural horror that sometimes unites them. Without it, threats become cleaner and more ruthless. Tyranids and Necrons don't bargain. They consume or reclaim. The Imperium could be more capable, but also colder and more systemic in its cruelty. Ultimately, a chaos-free 40K trades one kind of nightmare for another. Less mythic despair, more efficient, institutionalized extinction. That ending is not hopeful, it's simply different. If you enjoyed this alternate take, smash like, subscribe, and tell us below, which faction would you follow in a chaos-free galaxy? In the next episode, we'll simulate a specific sector, the fate of Ultramar under these rules. See you there.